Good day, grade 12 learners. Welcome to today's Life Sciences lesson. My name is Ditero Magwala. This program is brought to you by the Northern Cape Department of Education, and it is broadcast by Pagama Research and Development. So in today's lesson, we are looking at a new chapter. We are looking at a new topic. We are looking at the human nervous system and some sense organs, right? So here, today, we are going to look at the need for the human nervous system. Why do we need the human nervous system? What is the importance of the human nervous system and how does it help us as human beings, right? And then we are then going to look at the central nervous system. We're going to focus on the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord. However, in today's lesson, we are just going to focus on the brain, and we will then look at the spinal cord in the next few lessons. All right, so as I have said, we are going to look at the nervous system, whereby we are going to look at why is it important? Why do we need the human nervous system, right? And then we are going to look at the structure of the brain. So with the structure of the brain, we are going to look at the cerebrum, the cerebellum, the corpus callosum, as well as the medulla oblongata. So as we look at these parts, we are going to look at their structure. We're going to look at their functions as well. Right, so this is just going to give us an overview of what the human nervous system does and how it is useful. Right, okay, and then we will then move on to the peripheral nervous system, whereby we will look at the autonomic nervous system as well as the somatic nervous system. So we will be looking at all of these in today's lesson. Right, okay, so lastly, here this is part of your paper 1 examination. So it is responding to the environment in humans, and you are going to be looking at 54 marks from this chapter alone, right? So it has quite a lot of marks, so you should give it some time when you prepare for your examinations. Okay, so by the end of our lesson today, you should be able to describe the need for the human nervous system. As we have said, we're going to look at 2 reasons why this human nervous system is important. You should be able to describe the parts of the central nervous system. So you must know the parts, you must be able to identify them, and also give the functions. Give functions of the parts of the central nervous system. And you should also be able to describe the functioning of the autonomic nervous system as well as the somatic nervous system. All right, so our pre-knowledge here would be the systems of the human body, which is what we did in grade 9, right? So here we will be specifically focusing on the human nervous system. All right, let's have a look at a quick baseline assessment before we get into today's lesson. So we have a question here which says list the 5 sense organs. So we have 5 sense organs, which are the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, and the skin, right? So there we have our 5 sense organs. So these sense organs, as I've said, we are going to be looking at the human nervous system and sense organs. So these sense organs work together with the central nervous system. They work together with the peripheral nervous system. So we are going to be looking at the central nervous system. However, as we move on with our lesson, we are also going to be looking at the human eye, for example, the ear, and how these work together with the brain or with the central nervous system. Okay, our terminology for today is involuntary action. These are actions which take place without consciousness or willingness of an individual. For example, here we will be looking at actions such as digestion, heart beating, as well as sneezing. And then we have voluntary action, which is when an action is produced with the involvement of thoughts. Examples of these would be walking, eating, jumping, and running. Right. Okay, and then we have homeostasis. This is the natural tendency of the body to maintain a constant environment, internal environment, irrespective of the changes in the external environment. So your body must be able to maintain a constant internal environment, meaning that the internal environment must not change too much. It should not increase too much. It should not decrease too much, regardless of whether there are any changes in the external environment or not. Right? Okay. And then we have a receptor, that is a structure or part of the body that produces a nerve impulse when it receives an environmental stimulus. So whatever changes that happen in the external environment, those are regarded as the stimulus, right? So the receptors are the ones that would receive this stimulus, meaning that when you touch a person and on their skin and they receive the fact that you are touching them, that is the receptor receiving that external environmental stimulus, right? And then we have an impulse. These are messages that passes along a nerve in the form of an electrical signal. So these impulses are passed from the sense organs to the central nervous system or to the brain in order for an individual to be able to react, which is what we're just going to talk about now, being able to react to the changes that happen in the external environment, right? And then we have effectors. These are muscles or glands that react in response to a stimulus. Right, so we have muscles and we have glands that would react to a stimulus. So these would react to any change that would take place. So for example, your muscles would contract or relax when there is a stimulus from the external environment. Okay, now why do we need the nervous system? The need for the nervous system. Why is the nervous system so important? Right, I'm just going to give you guys a scenario, and then we're going to look at that scenario and analyze how the nervous system is important in this case. Right, so it says here, Dumisani is driving from work. He stopped at a traffic light when it changed from amber or yellow to red. Right, so we know what happens when you come across a traffic light and the colors change from green to amber, or from amber to red, or from red to green, right? So in this case of Dumisani, the traffic lights changed from yellow to red, right? So from caution to stop. Therefore, Dumisani became aware of this change in the environment, which is the changing of the traffic light from yellow to red, and he reacted by stopping the car, right? So what told Dumisani to stop the car, right? So it was the nervous system that analyzed that stimulus or that change in the external environment. So the nervous system made him aware of the changes in the environment, and it also sent a message to his muscles to then react. Right, so he then reacted by stopping the car. Right, so again, the nervous system is the one that detected the changes in the external environment and reacted to these changes. So that is one of the functions or the importance of the human nervous system, to detect changes in the external environment and to react accordingly to those changes. Okay, so the nervous system is needed for two main reasons that we are going to look at. Firstly, it enables the body to detect changes in both the internal and the external environment and respond to those changes, right? So like I just said now, with Dumisani, he saw the external environment change. He saw the traffic light change and he reacted by stopping. Obviously, after a while, he saw the traffic light change from red to green, means that he then moved from there, right? So it was with the help of the sense organs, which were the eyes, for him to be able to see that change, right? So the eyes, which are the sense organs, received that change and sent a message to the central nervous system, whereby this change was analyzed and a message was sent from his brain to the muscles of his legs to step on the brakes and stop the car, right? And then later on, he saw the light change to green using his eyes again, the sense organs, and then a message was sent again to the muscles of his legs to contract or relax in order for the car to then move, right? So these changes would ensure that the internal environment of the body is kept constant, right? So these changes from the external environment or changes from the internal environment. So all these changes are detected by the nervous system, and the nervous system would send messages to the parts of the body in order for those parts to be able to react, right? So when the internal environment is kept constant, we are talking about homeostasis. Like we said, this is the tendency of the body to keep its internal environment constant regardless of the changes that have taken place in the external environment. So the nervous system helps to maintain this constant environment, or to maintain homeostasis basically. So examples here would be the constant body temperature. We know that the body temperature remains around 37 degrees Celsius. If it increases, it cannot increase too much. If it decreases also, it cannot decrease too much. So being able to maintain this constant body temperature is regarded as homeostasis. The constant blood sugar levels, the constant blood pressure as well. All of these make sure that is done by homeostasis. So the body's tendency to maintain that constant environment, right? So if there is an imbalance, that imbalance is going to be corrected and homeostasis will then be maintained. So the second need for the human nervous system is that the nervous system will then coordinate various activities of the body. Whenever certain things in the body take place, there needs to be coordination, right? So if you are walking, you need to have coordination. You are going to step with your left foot, then with your right foot, and so on. You would keep stepping forward in order for you to be able to walk, right? That is coordination. If you are not moving your one foot and you're just moving one, that movement will not take place. You will not move forward. That will be due to lack of coordination. Most of the activities that we do need coordination. For you to be able to eat, to feed yourself, you need to be able to use your hand to pick up food from one plate into a plate into your mouth, and so on. So all of that needs coordination, and that is due to the functioning of the nervous system again. Okay, there are two types of reactions that are brought about by the nervous system. So we have voluntary actions, and we also have involuntary actions. So we have actions whereby we would decide that we want to do this kind of an action. So we would voluntarily do that action, right? And then with involuntary actions, these are those actions that take place without any kind of consciousness, right? So those are activities or actions that you would do without having to think about them. So an example of that would be things such as a knee jerk. It would be things such as sneezing and coughing, because you do not decide that I want to sneeze, right? It just happens. And as it happens, we know that it is involuntary, and it is due to the human nervous system, right? So an example here, we can see this would be voluntary because these children have decided that they're going to jump, right? Whereas this knee jerk over here is not voluntary, and it is an involuntary action, right? So the central nervous system can also be referred to as the CNS. And like I said, central nervous system includes two parts, mainly two parts, which is the brain as well as the spinal cord. So these two parts make up part of the central nervous system. Right. Okay, so we are going to be looking at the external structure and the internal structure of the brain. Right. Okay, so this is the upper enlarged part of the spinal cord. So as we can see here, they are connected. Here we have the spinal cord at the bottom, and then at the top now we have the brain. So it is the upper part of the spinal cord, right? So it continues with the spinal cord as we have seen. So this brain is protected by the cranium of the head, right? And a set of three membranes. Those three membranes are referred to as the meninges. The meninges, or these meninges membranes, protect both the brain and the spinal cord. So both the spinal cord and the brain are protected by the meninges, right? So as we can see here, we have those layers of membranes called the meninges. We have the skull on the outside, and we then have the skin, right? So the brain is protected by the cranium as well as those meninges. All right, it is made up of mainly three parts. Those are the parts that we are going to look at. The first one being the cerebrum. As we can see, that big part of the brain, that is what we refer to as the cerebrum. And then secondly, we have the cerebellum, which is the bottom part here, the small part just underneath the cerebrum. And we also have the medulla oblongata, which is the last part over there, and as it extends, it will then move down to the spinal cord. Right. Okay, so as we can see here, we have our cerebrum, right? And then we have the cerebellum here, as well as the medulla, right? Okay. The brain has some hollow cavities. As we can see here, we have some hollow cavities. These cavities are referred to as the ventricles, right? And these ventricles contain a fluid. They are filled with a fluid, and that fluid is referred to as the cerebrospinal fluid. So within these ventricles, that is where we would find the cerebrospinal fluid, right? And then again, with the internal structure of the cerebrum, it is made up of white matter on the inside. As we can see, the inside is more white than the outside, and then it is made up of gray matter on the outside. White matter on the inside and gray matter on the outside, right? The cerebrum is the largest part of the brain. As you can see when we are looking at the structure, it is the largest part. It then also made up of the cerebellum and the medulla oblongata. Those would be the three main parts that make up the brain, with the cerebrum being the largest part of the brain, right? So as I have said, it is made up of white matter on the inside and gray matter on the outside, right? And then it is divided into two halves. As we can see over here, it is divided into two parts, or two halves, and these two parts are referred to as the hemispheres. So we have the left hemisphere as well as the right hemisphere. So the interesting part about this is that the left hemisphere of the brain, let's say this is the left hemisphere and this is the right hemisphere, right? So the left hemisphere of the brain would control the left side of the body, right? So the right hemisphere controls the left side of the body, whereas the left hemisphere would then control the right side of the body, right? Okay. And these two hemispheres are held together by a bundle of nerve fibers, and those bundle of nerve fibers make up what we call the corpus callosum, right? So the largest nerve fiber is the corpus callosum. What does this corpus callosum do? It connects the left hemisphere with the right hemisphere. So it brings those two hemispheres together. Right, let's move on to the other parts. So we know that this is the cerebrum, right? And then we have the ventricles, which contain the cerebrospinal fluid. We have the corpus callosum, which holds together the two hemispheres of the cerebrum, right? So now underneath that corpus callosum, just underneath the corpus callosum over here, we have what we call the thalamus, and right underneath the thalamus, we now have the hypothalamus. The function of the hypothalamus is to maintain blood pressure and to maintain body temperature. So as we have said, blood pressure, body temperature, they need to remain constant, right? So the role that the hypothalamus plays here is to make sure that those two do actually remain constant, right? So there we have the medulla, as we have seen previously, and we have the cerebellum, which is right underneath the cerebrum. Okay, now let's have a look at the functions of the cerebrum. The cerebrum controls voluntary actions. We just spoke about voluntary actions, and we said these are actions that you'd have to think about before you do them. So you think and you decide that you are going to actually carry on with those type of actions, right? And then it is responsible for all sensations. When we are talking about sensations, we would be talking about seeing, we would be talking about hearing, we would be talking about feeling when someone touches you, we would be talking about tasting, and so on, right? So this cerebrum is actually responsible for all of those sensations. As I have said, the brain and the sense organs are working together. So the brain, the cerebrum, is the one that is going to be receiving messages from all of these sense organs and interpreting those messages. Right. Okay. It is also responsible for memory, judgment, and reasoning. So for a person to be able to remember certain things, the cerebrum needs to be working. right? When a person needs to make a judgment on certain situations, also the cerebrum needs to be functioning. And when they reason as well, that is the functioning of the cerebrum, right? And lastly, it controls high thought processes, right? So when you think about something that is of high thought, it is the functioning of the cerebrum. Right, now let's have a look at the cerebellum. Like I said, the cerebellum is found right underneath the cerebrum. As you can see there, we have the cerebellum. This cerebellum, just like the cerebrum, is made up of white matter on the inside and gray matter on the outside. Right, so both the cerebrum and the cerebellum are both made up of white matter on the inside and gray matter on the outside. Right, now what is the responsibility of the cerebellum? It is responsible for coordination of voluntary movements. Right, as I've said, when we're talking about voluntary movements, we would be talking about movements that you have thought about, right? So movements that you have sat and said, I am going to do this kind of a movement. All right, so the cerebellum is responsible for involuntary movements. So remember, when we looked at the cerebrum, we said that it is responsible for voluntary movements, right? So these are movements whereby you would decide that you want to undergo this. You would decide that I want to walk around, I want to move, I want to sit, and so on. So the cerebrum is responsible for voluntary movements, whereas the cerebellum is responsible for involuntary movements, meaning that these are the movements that you do not decide whether you want to undergo these kind of movements or not. So like I said earlier, things such as sneezing, things such as coughing, things such as a knee jerk, those are involuntary movements, and that those are movements that are controlled by the cerebellum, right? And then we have muscle tone. Maintains muscle tone, it maintains balance as well as equilibrium. So we are going to be looking at the human ear later on. So we are then going to see the relationship between the cerebellum and the human ear, right? Because the human ear is also involved in balance and equilibrium. Now, it means that there should be some kind of a relationship, some kind of a communication between the cerebellum and the human ear in order to make sure that balance and equilibrium is maintained. Right. And then lastly, we have the medulla oblongata. Now, unlike the cerebrum and the cerebellum, the medulla oblongata is now made up of gray matter on the inside and white matter on the outside, which is the total opposite of both the cerebrum and the cerebellum. Right. So now this gray matter on the inside would form that H shape that we can see over there. That is the gray matter of the inside of the medulla oblongata. Right. Now we also have the central canal, which we can see is right there. And this central canal is filled up with the cerebrospinal fluid, just like the ventricles of the actual brain itself, the whole brain itself. Right. Now, what does the medulla oblongata do? What are the functions of the medulla oblongata? So it transmits impulses from the spinal cord to the brain. So impulses, messages from the external environment, they move from the spinal cord to the brain. So because the medulla oblongata is found right between these two, it is the one that is able to transmit these impulses from the spinal cord to the brain and from the brain to the spinal cord. So it is a vas-to-vas movement of these impulses. And then it is also important or responsible for involuntary actions because it contains the reflex centers. We are going to be looking at the reflex action or the reflex arc in the next lesson, whereby we are going to be looking at quick responses to certain actions, right? Or quick reactions to certain actions. So we are going to be looking at that. And here we are also going to be looking at things such as breathing, heartbeat, salivation, and swallowing. Okay, let's have a look at an activity on the human brain. We have 3.1.1 here. It says, briefly explain the need for a nervous system in humans. Remember, we looked at 2 reasons why the human nervous system is needed, right? And the first one was that it detects changes in the external environment. So if there are any changes in the external environment, it will detect those changes and it will bring about a reaction to these changes. So it reacts to those changes. And then secondly, it coordinates the various activities in the body. So coordination and controlling of the changes that are taking place in the external environment are the main functions of the human nervous system. Okay, 3.1.2, mention the position and functioning of the meninges. So remember, the meninges are responsible for the protection of the brain, right? So it contains a system of 3 membranes that are covering and protecting the brain as well as the spinal cord. Remember, we did say that the meninges are responsible for protecting both the spinal cord and the brain. Okay, 3.1.3, give the letter and name of the part from the diagram that is responsible for the following. Firstly, that is responsible for maintaining the body's muscle tone and balance. We have just looked at this, right? So that is part F, which is the cerebellum, right? So the cerebellum is down here, and that is part F. Okay, and then the next one, for the regulation of breathing and of heartbeat, right? So here we are talking about involuntary actions, right? So which one controls these involuntary actions? That would be part D, which is the medulla oblongata. As we can see, the medulla oblongata is found just right there, just underneath all of those parts of the brain, underneath the cerebrum and so on. Okay, now we are moving on to the peripheral nervous system. Right, so the peripheral nervous system basically works outside of the central nervous system. However, it does work together with the central nervous system at the end of the day. We may be looking at these different systems or the different parts of the system separately or individually. However, we should keep in mind that all of these all of these parts work together to make sure that there is that coordination that I've just mentioned, and to make sure that the body is functioning properly. Okay, so the peripheral nervous system is made up of all nerves that are found outside the central nervous system. Like I said, it works outside of the nervous system, so it is definitely not part of the central nervous system. Right, okay, it includes the cranial as well as the spinal nerves, right? So we are going to be looking at how all of these work together to make sure that the human body is fully functional, right? So the peripheral nervous system is divided into 2 parts. These 2 parts are the somatic nervous system as well as the autonomic nervous system. So we are just going to briefly look at what exactly happens with the somatic nervous system and what exactly happens with the autonomic nervous system, right? Okay, so with the autonomic nervous system, here we are going to be looking at internal environment changes. So this one deals with the internal environment, whereas the somatic nervous system deals with the external environment, right? So with the internal environment, we would be looking at all of the changes that may take place on the inside of the body, and those are the changes that deals with or is dealt with the autonomic nervous system. Okay, so the somatic nervous system is made up of all the parts of the nervous system that reacts to change the external environment. So whenever you think somatic nervous system, think external environment. So the reaction of to the changes in the external nervous in the external environment is due to the somatic nervous system. So this somatic nervous system is made up of some free nerve endings as well as sense organs. Remember, all our sense organs are able to sense changes in the external environment, right? So they are able to detect any changes that have taken place in the external environment. Okay, and then as we can see over here, we have an external stimuli or an external stimulus or a change in the external environment, right? We can see that here we have a fire or a flame, and then we are going to see this individual being able to react to that change in the external environment, or to their hand being burnt by that flame, right? So here we have neurons. We have sensory neurons that are responsible for carrying the impulses from the receptors. Remember, we spoke about the sense organs and the fact that they contain some receptors. So we can see here the receptors in the skin, right? So those receptors in the skin are going to detect this change in the environment, in the external environment, which is this individual being burnt because of the flame that they were exposed to, right? Now, these sensory neurons are going to carry the impulses, or they are going to carry the messages to the central nervous system for interpretation. So the central nervous system is responsible for interpreting whatever changes that have taken place in the external environment, right? And then from there, it is going to now pass the impulses through to the motor nerves, right? So those are the ones that send, or they carry impulses to the effectors, right? The effectors would be the parts of the body that are now reacting. Okay. All right, so we can see here this person is burnt by the flame, and then they are going to react. They are going to react by doing what? By moving their hand away, right? So the motor nerves, or the motor neurons, would then carry impulses to the effectors. Like I said, the effectors are the parts that react. They're the parts that would contract or relax in order to react. So if you are moving your hand away, that part of your hand would now be your effectors. Right, so the motor neurons would carry impulses from the central nervous system and send them to the effectors to bring about a response, or to bring about a change. Okay, now we have the effectors, right, which can either be muscles or they can be glands. We just looked at this previously now. So the glands would usually secrete things such as hormones, which would then be able to bring about a certain change, right? And then with the muscles, these are the muscles of our body that are responsible for movement, mainly movement. They make sure that we are able to move from one place to another by contracting and relaxing. Okay, so an example here is of a person removing their hand from a hot stove. So because they are doing that, the receptors in the hand, in the skin, were able to receive that change. So after receiving that change, they're going to make sure that the change is then being sent to the brain, right? Once the change is sent to the brain will receive that change and it will interpret it in order to send a message back to the organs, for the organs to move themselves away from that dangerous situation, in this case being the hot pot, and therefore making sure that they are not harmed. Right. Okay. As we have said with the somatic nervous system, we said it controls the external nervous system, or the external environment. With the autonomic nervous system, however, we are looking at the internal environment, and it controls involuntary actions, meaning that it is going to basically be controlling all the actions that are taking place, regardless of whether the person wants those things to take place or not. For example, like I said, sneezing is something that you cannot really control, therefore it will take place whether you volunteer to do it or not, right? Okay, so we have many changes that can take place in the internal environment, right? So maintaining those is referred to as homeostasis. So these reactions or actions are maintained as a result of homeostasis in order to maintain that internal environment, right? So now with the autonomic nervous system, it is responsible for actions like heart rate. So you do not decide whether you want your heart to beat or not, right? The heart will beat on its own, right? Controlling the blood glucose levels. As you eat your food, your glucose levels would increase. Maintaining those or controlling these blood glucose levels is a responsibility of the autonomic nervous system, and it will make sure that those glucose levels are kept constant to make sure that the environment, the internal environment, remains constant. There isn't any major increases or major decreases. Right, okay. So this system, the autonomic nervous system, is made up of the centers in the brain as well as the spinal cord. It is also made up of the nerve cells in the smooth muscles, the glands, as well as in the internal organs. And it is also made up of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system that are going to now supply these different parts. Now let's have a look at what is the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. How do the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system function, or how do they work? Right. Okay. So here, each organ in the body would have a supply of both these nerves, both the nerves of the sympathetic nervous system and the nerves of the parasympathetic nervous system, right? So these two systems, or these two nerves, work together in the body. So they need to work together in order to make sure that things are coordinated properly within the body. So now they work antagonistically, meaning that they do not work exactly at the same time. You cannot have contraction and relaxation of the muscles at the same time and expect to have a good reaction. Right. So they work antagonistically, meaning that they work opposite each other. When one of the muscles relaxes, the other muscle would contract. Okay, so remember with the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, we said that these two work antagonistically, meaning that they work opposite each other. They will not be functioning at the same time, right? So if, for example, your muscles are contracting, the other muscles would then be relaxing. If there's contraction of the biceps, the triceps would be relaxing. So they have to work together. When one contracts, the other one must relax to make sure that there is that coordination in the movement of the human being as a whole, right? So the sympathetic and the parasympathetic are basically working opposite of each other. They are working antagonistically. Right. Okay. So the sympathetic nervous system is responsible for the fight or flight function in emergency situations. So the sympathetic is the one that is going to cause an individual to be alert, is the one that is going to cause an individual to fight if they are in a situation, or to run away from that situation. Right. So this is just whereby an individual is going to be very aware of the situation, right? Okay. Whereas with the parasympathetic, it is going to do quite the opposite of what the sympathetic is doing, right? So this one is the one that makes sure that an individual would be more calm and relaxed. So from that situation, let's say you came across a scary situation, you ran away, and then you realize that, okay, now you are safe, right? So that is when the parasympathetic system would kick in, right? Once you are now starting to relax, you are going to be starting to relax due to the parasympathetic nervous system, which now returns or restores the body to the normal state after that emergency situation. So you might just be scared of something, or you might just be finding yourself in a very stressful situation, right? Let's say you have a homework that you did not finish, right? So because it is time to submit and you're not done, you are there with trying to make sure that you finish your homework on time, right? So that would be due to the sympathetic nervous system. You are going to be on that fight or flight mode, making sure that you finish your work on time, right? And then you finish eventually, and then you submit your work, right? So now your system is going to go back, or your body is going to go back to the normal state after that emergency. It's going to be restored, right? So now that is when the parasympathetic would be kicking in. So let's just have a look at some of the things that are due to the sympathetic nervous system and due to the parasympathetic nervous system. So things such as irritability, an individual who is irritable, that would be due to the sympathetic. Anxiety, because you are in a panic mode, and so on. Fatigue, depression, muscle tension, as well as high blood pressure. Those would be due to the sympathetic nervous system. As we can see, all of these situations whereby you are not relaxed, right? However, with the sympathetic nervous system, you would be breathing, you would be mediating, you would be visualizing positive and healing images. You would also be very much relaxed, basically, in this case, because now everything is calm, everything is back to normal, and there is no emergency situation in this case. Because who would be relaxed, who would be mediating, who would be experiencing progressive relaxation during an emergency situation? No one, right? Now, when you are relaxed, it means that there is no emergency situation. Now the parasympathetic nervous system has kicked in and you are basically just relaxed. Right. Okay. So we can also explain this, that in the heart, the sympathetic nerves cause the heart rate to increase. Again, when you are running away from that emergency situation, your heart rate is going to increase. It's not just increasing for no reason. It is also increasing because you are going to now be pumping a lot of blood to your cells. You're going to be pumping a lot of blood in order to provide your cells with energy so that you can be able to run quicker if it is a flight mode, right? And if you are trying to complete that homework, your brain also needs to function quicker in that situation, as it is an emergency. So your heart rate needs to be as quick as possible. It needs to be increased so that it can be able to provide all these cells that are functioning at that time with enough oxygen, right? Now, with the parasympathetic, now you would also feel that your heart rate has decreased. Your heart is no longer pumping as fast, and that means that you do not need to provide all of those cells with any oxygen or with a lot of oxygen at that time, because your body is now in just a relaxed mode. So we can see here, if you are scared, your pupils would basically be dilated because you are scared. Your heart rate is faster, as we can see. The lungs also increase the intake of oxygen. You will be breathing in and out at a very fast rate because you are now trying to make sure that you run away from that situation, or you fix that situation as quick as possible. Your stomach contracts also will be slow. All right. Now, as I've said, these are some of the things that we've just looked at. Your heart rate increasing and your heart rate decreasing with the parasympathetic system, vasodilation and vasoconstriction with constriction with the sympathetic, and dilation with the parasympathetic, and so on. And then you can experience things such as increased blood pressure and decreased blood pressure when everything is now relaxed. Right. Okay, let's have a look at an activity on the autonomic nervous system. It says that the autonomic nervous system controls all involuntary actions. We have spoken about that. Autonomic controls involuntary actions, whereas the somatic controls the voluntary actions, as well as the changes in the external environment. Remember, when you see some changes in the external environment, you may decide to react or to not react. So that is a voluntary action, right? So the autonomic nervous system controls involuntary actions in the human body, and it conducts impulses from the central nervous system. So it receives impulses from the central nervous system, basically from the brain, right? Okay. 2.4.1, it says name 2 locations that impulses from the autonomic nervous system are conducted to. So when this autonomic nervous system is functioning and it's conducting impulses around the body, which parts of the body or which 2 locations would it be conducting these 2? So which parts of the body would react in response to the functioning of the autonomic nervous system? So this would be things such as the smooth muscles, it would be things such as the heart muscles, as well as the glands. We just spoke about the heart rate increasing. So the heart muscles would have to contract and relax differently due to the functioning of the autonomic nervous system. Right, your muscles as well would function differently due to that. Your muscles would relax and contract differently due to the functioning of the autonomic nervous system as they receive these impulses from the autonomic nervous system. Okay, and then we have 2.4.2. It says describe the functioning of the autonomic nervous system. So like we have just looked at, we know that it controls involuntary actions, right? And we know that it controls the changes in the internal environment, right? So we have glands. Remember, those glands would also react to the autonomic nervous system. These glands would basically release certain hormones that would make certain processes to take place. So the glands and all organs are controlled by two sets of nerves. We know that they're controlled by the two sets of nerves, which are part of the autonomic nervous system. As I've said just now with the heart muscles, they would contract or relax, which is the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, right? Okay, so these two nerves that act antagonistically, that act opposite to each other, right? And then the autonomic nervous system is divided into two parts or two nerves, right? The sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Those are the parts that work antagonistically. Those are the parts that work opposite to each other. When the sympathetic sets in, the parasympathetic would relax. And then later on, after that emergency situation, the parasympathetic would then function to make sure that your body is now back to the normal state. It is restored to the normal state after that emergency. So basically, the sympathetic nerves would stimulate the fight or flight function. As we have seen, they would stimulate the fight or flight function in the emergency situation, whereby you are either going to fight or you are going to run away from that situation. We gave an example of running away from the situation, or whereby you would be racing, trying to complete that homework on time before it's time to submit. Right now, the parasympathetic would set in after all of that has passed. The parasympathetic would set in after you have submitted your homework. Now you can relax. Therefore, there is no need for the sympathetic. Now the parasympathetic would be the one that would cause that relaxation. So it basically inhibits a response and it restores the body to normal. So the body will now relax, will be more relaxed, unlike when there is the functioning of the sympathetic nervous system. All right, let's just quickly summarize everything that we have looked at today. So starting with the brain, right? Remember, we looked at the three main parts of the brain. We looked at the cerebrum, we looked at the cerebellum, and we looked at the medulla oblongata. Very important for you to know these functions. It is very, very, very important. Make sure that you know the functions of these three parts, because as we are moving further in this activity, we simply looked at what the different parts do and so on. However, as you are moving forward, you would be looking at questions whereby you are asked what would happen if the cerebellum is damaged, right? First, you must know what the cerebellum does before you can be able to answer questions on what would happen if the cerebellum is damaged, right? So firstly, you would have to know that the cerebellum is responsible for balance and coordination, right? Remember, when we're talking about coordination, we are talking about coordination of movement. Your movements needs to be coordinated. There needs to be coordination when you move around, right? So that balance and coordination would not take place if the cerebellum is damaged. Now you will not be able to coordinate your movements now. And then posture as well, which is related to balance and coordination, those things would lack if the cerebellum is damaged. Again, you must know the functions of the cerebrum. Remember, here we're talking about memory. When you want to memorize something, it is due to the cerebrum, right? When you want to remember something, it's due to that. Higher thought functions, intelligence, that is due to the cerebrum, right? Speech and memory, receiving all stimuli that have to do with senses, which is hearing, vision, taste, and smell. So all of that, as well as some voluntary movements, meaning we are talking about the skeletal muscle movements. Remember, those type of movements are voluntary. So all of this also would not be able to take place if the cerebrum is damaged. Right. So it is very important for you to understand the functions in order to be able to answer questions that are related to the brain, even though the questions are not specifically asking what is the function of this and so on. And then lastly, we have the medulla oblongata, which controls the heart rate, right? It controls involuntary actions. The heart rate, the breathing rate, the blood pressure, vomiting, swallowing, and digestion. All of these are actions that we do not control. These are actions that are involuntary, and they are all controlled by the medulla oblongata. Okay, now with the human nervous system as a whole, remember, it detects changes in both the internal and the external environment. And as it detects those changes, it is going to make sure that the body is able to react to those changes. Right. And then it coordinates various activities of the body. As the body reacts, remember, there needs to be coordination. So it receives changes from the environment and it interprets these changes. So as you see that red light on the traffic light, right? As the yellow changes to red, your brain is going to receive that. It is going to analyze that, and then it is going to say, okay, you have to stop. You have to step on the brakes and stop the car. Right? For that to happen, there needs to be coordination. You don't just step on the brakes. There needs to be coordination for that to happen. Right? So it coordinates various body activities. And then we have the somatic nervous system, which reacts to the external environment. We also have the autonomic nervous system, which reacts to the internal environment. Remember, with the autonomic nervous system, that is where we look at the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system, which work antagonistically, meaning that they work opposite each other. And as the other one is working, the other one will be relaxing, and then the other one will set in once the other one is not working. So as the parasympathetic is working, the sympathetic will not be working. As the sympathetic is working, the parasympathetic will not be working. Okay, in our next lesson, we are then going to look at the structure and functioning of the nerve as well as the spinal cord, right? So here we are going to be looking at the reflex arc as well. So we will be looking at reflex action and reflex arc, as well as the functioning of the nerve. So here we will be looking at all the neurons and how they function, and then we are going to incorporate that with the reflex arc and the reflex action, which now includes or involves the spinal cord. Okay, so we have homework here. It says the diagram below shows a human brain. So you are going to look at this diagram of the human brain. You are then going to answer the questions. So another thing, before you even try to answer the questions, it will be very nice for you to try and label the parts first. So just go ahead and label these parts first: the cerebrum, the corpus callosum, the cerebellum, the spinal cord, the medulla oblongata, and then you know that once you start answering the questions, you already have that diagram labeled. If the question says give the name for part A, you already know what part A is. Or if it says give the name and letter of the part that is responsible for involuntary actions, you know that you're going to look at the medulla oblongata. You already know which part is the medulla oblongata. Then you give the name and you give that letter that represents, which is what you will be doing here. You're just going to be giving the letter and the name of the different parts. So you have the part that has the hemispheres connected by the corpus callosum. Which part is divided into hemispheres, right? Then you know that it is part A, for example, or part B. Then you will give that. Also, make sure that you give both the name and the letter to make sure that you get 2 marks. Because if you only give the name, you will get 1 mark. If you only give the letter, you would also get 1 mark. So make sure that you answer the questions as they are asked so that you can get all of the marks. All right, so there we have it. Just go and complete that homework, and we will discuss it in the next lesson. All right, we have come to the end of our lesson for today. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time. Goodbye.